I'm going to welcome on stage, without the music, Nigel Farage.
Good morning, everybody. In the early hours of the 5th of July, after the result in Clacton, I said, we've dealt with the Conservative Party, although to be fair, they pretty much dealt with themselves, I think, prior to the election. And I said very clearly, now we're coming for Labour. One person who did notice was Tony Blair. And that week's Sunday Times, he wrote a piece saying that Labour need to be very worried about reform. But over the course of the last 10 months, most of the commentary has been the battle, the civil war, as some would paint it, between the Conservative Party and us. But actually, quietly, we've been forming branches, vetting candidates, getting leafleting, getting campaigning, and doing it very much in the Labour parts of the country. And I promise you that something is happening out there. A little bit of evidence for you. Every Thursday, there are local council by-elections that take place around the country. I want to read out a few of them that have happened in the last 8 weeks. In the Longondale ward in Tameside, a council seat, interestingly, that was once held by Jonathan Reynolds. That solicitor. Oh, no, he's not a solicitor. Sorry about that. Our business secretary, who now runs British Steel, more of that later. In the Longondale ward last week, Reform came in, having never stood before, up 46.6%, Labour down 28.8%. A few weeks before that in St Helens, quite close to Runcorn. In the Blackbrook ward, Reform came in at 41.1%, with Labour down 18. In Wolverhampton, in Bilston, Reform up 34.8, Labour down 38.9. And in Torfan, in South Wales, Reform up 47, Labour down 49. These results have been happening week on week in areas that Labour would have considered ever since the end of the First World War to be their safest possible ever areas. And I mentioned Runcorn because Runcorn is that kind of constituency. It is Labour's 16th safest seat in the United Kingdom. Well, I'm going to be there again on Thursday of this week, and all I can tell you is we're giving them one hell of a run for their money, and it's going to be, you know, I get it. They've got 10 times the number of staff we've got. They've got a lot more money than we've got. They've got a much bigger machine than we've got, but it is going to be, I think, incredibly close in Runcorn. So in the Midlands, in the North, in Wales and in Scotland, Reform is now the opposition to the Labour Party, with the Conservatives trailing some way behind. And in these red wall areas, any thought that the Conservatives would start to win again seats that they surprised people with in 2019, some here indeed in County Durham, it's for the birds. The sheer level of betrayal of what people who voted for Boris Johnson in 2019 got. They didn't get the Brexit they voted for, and they got mass immigration on a scale never seen before in the history of these islands. Those people are not ever going to trust the Conservative Party up here again, and frankly, nor should they. So I can tell you that if you're considering voting Conservative in these areas, you are wasting your vote. Because if you want a party that can beat Labour, it is now very clearly Reform. Now, it's very appropriate that we're here today in County Durham, the old coal mining area that once employed 160,000 men and boys, and a place where Keir Hardie, the founder of the Labour movement, came and spoke regularly. The Labour Party exists, he said, to give the working man a voice. Well, that today, of course, would be the working man and working woman. But today's Labour Party doesn't think the way that Keir Hardie thought. No, Keir Starmer's Labour Party is a very middle-class party, North London dominated, full of human rights lawyers who seem to care more about vague concepts of international law coming from foreign and in some cases, in my view, illegitimate courts that it does about working people. And 10 months in, I announced today, perhaps for the first time publicly, that Reform are parking their tanks on the lawns of the Red Wall. Today's the first day I've said that, but I absolutely mean it, and we're here to stay. And the evidence is that people who are switching to us, this is not a short-term protest. They actually believe in us. They can see that we represent those values of family, community, country. They can see that we're patriotic. They can see we want to put the interests of British people above absolutely anybody else. So those voters are here, and they are going to stay. Now, you might have noticed there's been a bit of polling out overnight, which one of the newspapers picked up on, and I'll just give a little demo, I think. So 68% of people in the Red Wall poll believe that Britain is broken. And that's exactly our analysis. We're a country in economic decline. We're a country in societal decline. We're a country in cultural decline. And in particular, they point out here, borders, the NHS, and the economy failing. And I don't know who writes the headlines in The Sun, but I do think Keir's worst nightmare is quite funny. Well, if we go on like this, it'll be Nightmare on Downing Street, won't it? But there we are. What is really interesting here is if you look at that polling, that compares and contrasts where the parties are in the Midlands and the North compared to the 4th of July last year. The numbers couldn't be clearer. Reform are up 12%, and the Labour Party are down 12%. Our support is coming directly from people who have been, in many cases, lifelong Labour voters. And yeah, I get it, I understand it. Working people feel that they pay more and more tax, and yet in terms of the services they get at the other end, they get less and less and less. And they know we're in economic decline. They're not conned by GDP figures. Oh, GDP was up 0.1% this quarter, or 0.4, or whatever it is. But it's a completely false measure of how we're doing as a country. Why? Because gross domestic product measures the activities of all of us in a country. And if you pile in an extra 750,000 or an extra million people into a country, is it any wonder that your growth figures show that it's rising? But what does it mean for the individual? Well, let me tell you that gross domestic product per capita has fallen for 6 of the last 8 quarters, and I don't see any signs of that changing at all. In terms of social and cultural decline, well, it's Easter coming up, but you wouldn't know that listening to the BBC. You wouldn't even know that it was a Christian festival. It's as if we're almost embarrassed about what we are and who we are as a country. So, in the Red Wall and right across the North and the Midlands, Reform is currently polling on this opinion poll at 30%, with Labour at 27%, and the Conservatives on 22%. And I have to say, for us, that represents, I think, pretty astonishing progress in the space of just 10 months. I'm very, very proud of the collective efforts of everybody that's been part of that. I said back on that day when I said we'd take on Labour, I also said that I would professionalise and democratise the party. And boy, with over 400 branches now set up around the country, we're really beginning to hit our stride. Now, the figures make it clear. In the Red Wall, a Tory vote is a wasted vote. If you want to beat Labour, you've simply got to vote for us. But there's other data in those polls that I think is equally significant and interesting. And in particular, change. Vote Labour, vote Keir Starmer for change. That was what they told us. And yet, if you compare and contrast who they think these Red Wall voters most represents change, they choose me over Starmer by 35% to 22%. That is a pretty astonishing gap. And I'd pick out one other stat, and I know the press have got the full readout, one other stat that I think is significant, especially for a Labour Party, and for me saying it here, in County Durham, represents working people. Which party leader best represents working people? And on that, I've got an 8-point lead over Starmer. As I say, something really is happening out there. Now, we've conducted this polling. We are thrilled with the results. Labour have known these results for a long time because they're constantly polling and they know what's happening, which is why the Labour lie machine is in full groove. We see it in the House of Commons every week. We're certainly seeing it in the by-election in Runcorn, and we'll see it, I'm sure, here in County Durham and elsewhere. They're digging up the old Russia conspiracy theory, which somehow people seem to be so fond of. The fact that I said once 12 years ago that I respected Putin as a leader but didn't like him, wouldn't want to live in the country, and have condemned him for the attack, the vicious attack on Ukraine. But somehow, the line that Starmer keeps coming out with is that we fawn over Putin. Outright lies. On the NHS, they're putting out literature saying, vote reform, and they'll charge you 15 grand for a hip replacement. We've never, ever, ever suggested anything other than the NHS should be free. What worries us is all the tax money that goes in, how badly it gets spent and allocated. And I think with Britain is broken. Maybe the Prime Minister doesn't realise this, but the vast majority of us realise the NHS is not working as it was intended and needs radical reform. Of course, one of the problems is that 7.2 million foreign-born people have signed up with GPs in the last 10 years alone. Can you believe that? 7.2 million people extra. So don't be surprised if there's a big queue to get, an appointment with your local GP. But unlike Labour, we do support working men and women. And a vast percentage of our voters actually have alarms that go off in the morning. Yet, no, really, they get up and go to work. And they're beginning to ask themselves, why are we paying all this tax? What are we getting for it? I met four young blokes in a pub the other week. That probably won't surprise any of you. Four young blokes, Saturday evening, having a drink. They wanted to come and say hello, quick chat, all at school together. I asked them, what do you do? Plumber, welder, plasterer. Hard-working guys that get up early in the morning. And they all said the same thing. We earn good money, but we just feel our taxes are going up and up and up. And then one of them said, yeah, and there's three of our class, these were all early mid-20s, the three of our class never had a job, don't want to have a job, they've all got 2 or 3 kids, and our taxes and our hard work are subsidising their lifestyle. And this can't go on. This can't go on. Nobody is actually prepared to stand up and say, we must support working people, and we cannot go on with so many of our young people, frankly, choosing just not to work. So we're very much on the side of working people, and perhaps what happened in Scunthorpe last week rather sums it up. Now, Richard Tyson and I went up to the blast furnaces, not, by the way, an out-of-character thing for me to do, because I worked for 22 years in the metals business before getting involved in politics. And so many of the clients and customers that I had in those years have simply disappeared as we've watched British manufacturing decline to the most extraordinary degree. When Port Talbot closed in South Wales, government did nothing. When Redcar, just down the road, closed in 2015, government did nothing. In fact, government seemed pleased that by these plants closing down, it would reduce our annual CO2 emissions. So big victory. Not, of course, unless you think about it more deeply, because what happened to that steel production Well, in the case of Redcar, it went to India. In the case of Port Talbot, it's gone to China. Both will manufacture that same steel and then will ship it back to the United Kingdom. We haven't cut our carbon dioxide emissions. We've exported our carbon dioxide emissions at the destruction of many local communities. I don't believe there would have been a Saturday sitting of Parliament if Richard Tice and I had not been up to Scunthorpe and been greeted the way we were by those workers, especially in the local spoons afterwards. They actually felt there was someone speaking up for them. They actually felt there was somebody on their side. And that, I think, is why Labour did what they did. Where we go from here, I don't know. Although what a bizarre situation we've got this morning, where we're not quite sure where the coal is. You know, the coal that we could have manufactured ourselves and mined in Whitehaven in Cumbria? But oh no, we can't do that. That'd be no good for our carbon dioxide emissions. So we've actually imported some of it all the way from Japan. And now Coal Hunt is on as they desperately seek where this consignment is. We're living through a period of net zero lunacy, something that the Conservatives signed us up to, wrote into law, and believed in as if somehow it was their new religion. And this, of course, now being followed up by Red Ed, who is the high priest of this, who is determined to cover our agricultural land in Chinese slave labor-made farms, solar farms, and to despoil as much of our coastline as he possibly can. But it's okay, Labour told us in the election, because vote for us, and with our energy policies, we'll bring down the average family bill by, do you remember this? £300. It's quite an attractive offer, wasn't it, to the electorate? As of the 1st of April, the average family bill hasn't fallen £300, it's risen by £281. Almost the complete opposite of what they said. And when you think that 10 million people, 10 million pensioners have had their winter fuel allowance taken away, and most of them because during their working lives they'd saved for a small private pension and therefore don't qualify for pension credit. So you get hit in this country when you work, but you also get hit as a working person even when you've retired, and they have to pick up that cost. We have the highest industrial energy prices in the world, and we're witnessing an industrial massacre. It's going on in chemicals. It's going on in refining. It's going on in cement making. We no longer produce aluminium in this country. Both of our major smelters have closed down, and steel is just one of a long line of these disasters. And I understand that industries through decades can change. Some become obsolete, and you need to find replacements. But we will be using steel. In fact, we will be using huge amounts of steel. After all, the Prime Minister seemed very proud of the big 40-acre theme park that's going to get built in Bedfordshire. Well, we're going to need tens of thousands of tons of steel for that, and I think we should be manufacturing that steel here, not importing it from China. And the same goes for the North Sea. Conservatives put exorbitant taxation levels on profits in the North Sea, which saw companies that in some cases had invested in the North Sea for up to 60 years go, and Labour, well, now are making life almost impossible. We should be self-sufficient in oil. We should be absolutely self-sufficient in gas, and we have to have energy in Britain, not that is intermittent and pushes us out to the edge when the lights almost went out at the end of January this year. We need to produce more energy and cheaper energy. 21st century living demands absolutely nothing less. And this is part of our strategy. Reform will re-industrialise Britain. And we'll have a proper, sound industrial policy, but it only works if we start producing enough of our own gas and oil and coal and all of those things. And we really, really believe in that. But when it comes to business, of course, Labour are completely and utterly clueless. 25 men and women in the cabinet, and not a single one has ever set up a private company. Not one. Seems almost unbelievable. Because we're not just on the side of those that work for big companies, we're very much on the side of those who struggle with IR35 rules, making it nightmarishly difficult for anyone that is self-employed. We're also on the side of the 5.5 million men and women that run small businesses that have been so badly hit by this most recent budget. And they felt for years, I mean, it was the Conservatives, of course, that pushed up corporation tax, which is what these small companies pay. The Conservatives pushed that up 30%. The Conservatives gave nothing on IR35, and the Conservatives did nothing on the quangos and regulators that make the lives of these people so miserable. Yeah, we believe in men and women setting up their own thing. We believe in people giving it a go, going out and trying to be successful, and we're very much on their side. And we're certainly on the side of hard-working family farms, people who work all the hours God sends in goodness knows what weather, whose average incomes are incredibly low, and yet the Labour Party has come for them in the most appalling way. I had a letter last Sunday from a lady, 90 years old, living in West Sussex. It had been a dairying farm, dairying business built up through generations, who said, my husband's died, my son Tim runs the farm, I'm now terrified that I won't live for 7 years. Because if I die within the next 7 years, he's going to have to sell off 20% plus of the land, and the whole thing becomes unviable. No doubt Ed Miliband wants those farms covered in solar farms and probably increased housing for an exploding population. But we're also on the side of those on low pay. And I think our biggest policy at the general election that we launched and we'll keep fighting for is, rather than the level at which we start paying tax being frozen, the way it is year after year after year, we believe the most dramatic tax change that is needed is to lift the level at which people start paying tax to £20,000 a year. That will mean people on low pay genuinely will be a bit better off. But equally important, it will incentivize those on benefits who know that if they work for more than 16 hours a week, all their benefits will be taken away. It will incentivize them to get back to work. So I firmly believe that we are the party of working people. We respect working people, we want to help working people, and we notice that unemployment is now at a 4-year high. And I think through what will happen over the course of this summer is that in retail and hospitality, as a result of that budget, many, many people, especially young people looking for part-time work, will find they simply cannot get those jobs. And there are many other areas in which this government has completely failed people. Starmer told us he was going to smash the gangs. Remember that? I thought, well, that had about as much chance as working as hearing every year we're launching a war on the drugs gangs. Well, that hasn't worked very well, and this was never going to work very, very well. And channel crossings, so far this year, are over 40% higher than they were last year, and that's before we get the warm weather, and it's before the temperatures in the channel increase. So we're on for a record year. No sign of anyone crossing the channel being deported. Yes, the Labour Party have got rid of some overstayers, that is true, but nobody that comes is going to be deported because, and the Prime Minister made it very clear, in only his second speech in the Commons as Prime Minister, he made it very, very clear how wedded he was to the European Convention on Human Rights, their associated court in Strasbourg, and the incorporation of all of that into the 1998 Human Rights Act. And as far as we're concerned, this is about sovereignty, just as the Brexit vote was about sovereignty, and we will leave the ECHR if we're in government. We'll repeal the Human Rights Act and stop our now somewhat corrupted judiciary from using this at every opportunity not to deport people. Unless we deport all of those that come illegally, they will continue to come. I can't give you legal immigration figures because they won't be out until June. It's quite likely that the numbers will be down, but still enormous. But remember, we're looking at the net. And what we will see in the figures are more and more and more people leaving the country. We're back in a 1970s brain drain. The sheer number of people I've spoke to who've said, I'm leaving, or if I could afford to, I would leave, is worrying and depressing. We've got to make this a place that people want to stay. And there's anger out there on the streets in these red wall areas over two-tier care, two-tier policing, two-tier justice, and two-tier recruitment. What happened after Southport was the most appalling cover-up. If we'd known the identity and something about the murderer, I don't believe those riots would have happened on anything like the scale that they did. But in a vacuum, of course, some crazy conspiracy theories were allowed to flourish. But what was clear is that people that rioted, or people that said intemperate things online in their upset and their anger, in some cases mothers of young children who wrote intemperate things online. They shouldn't have written them, but perhaps given the context of what had occurred, you can understand why emotions might have got a little bit out of control. They're all hoofed off to prison, whilst the men that committed those vile attacks at Manchester Airport, nothing happened to them. It wasn't until we, the Reform MPs, threatened to take a private prosecution that actually the government and the CPS kicked into gear. And we see this every single day. We see recruitment policies in police forces, recruitment policies in the NHS, designed to put ethnic minorities to the top of the list against white people with more history in this country. And we think not only is that a disgrace, not only does it mean you won't necessarily get the best people into the right positions to do jobs, but we also think it is a huge insult to the people of this country who are the most reasonable, open-minded, decent people you will find in any Western nation. And we always have been, and we always will be. We do not believe in DEI and that madness in any way at all. But it's all part of the North London human rights lawyers being completely out of touch with ordinary folk, being completely out of touch with working people. And in our party, this reform people's army that we're building, and I'm seeing it every day as I go to, I was in Devon yesterday, I was in Gloucestershire yesterday, I was in Cornwall yesterday, I'll be in Lancashire tomorrow, Runcorn Thursday, and everywhere I go, I meet our candidates, I meet our activists, and it's really interesting. Some come from a centre-right background, some come from a centre-left background. It's not about left or right, it's about values. And it's about believing that our country is going down the tubes. It's about understanding that Britain is broken and that without the right leadership, without the right change of mentality, then I think most of us feel within a decade, it frankly won't be a place worth living in. And we are damn determined to turn